The 7 Laws of Noah. Almost everyone knows the 10 Commandments of Moses and the central moral teachings associated with Jesus. But there's another ancient moral framework that many people know far less about. The 7 Laws of Noah, often called the Noahide Laws. According to Jewish tradition, these laws were given not only to one specific people, but to humanity more broadly. In other words, while the full body of biblical commandments in Judaism applies specifically to the Jewish people, the Noahide laws are understood as a universal moral code for all nations. That is precisely what makes them so interesting. The logic behind this tradition is simple. A people with a special covenant bears greater responsibility, and therefore receives more commandments, more duties, more restrictions, and more ritual obligations. Other nations, by contrast, are not expected to carry the entire legal and religious system of Judaism. Instead, they are given a smaller set of universal laws, a kind of minimum ethical structure necessary for civilized human life. In traditional Jewish thought, these 7 laws are associated with Noah after the flood, though some interpretations connect their roots even earlier, to Adam and the first principles of human moral order. So what are the 7 laws of Noah? First, the prohibition of idolatry. This means rejecting the worship of false gods or idols and affirming a single divine source rather than fragmented cults of power. Second, the prohibition of blasphemy. This concerns respect for the divine and the rejection of direct verbal rebellion against sacred order. Third, the prohibition of murder. Human life is treated as sacred, and unlawful killing is forbidden. Fourth, the prohibition of sexual immorality. In traditional interpretation, this includes a range of forbidden sexual relations that destroy social and family order. Fifth, the prohibition of theft. Property, boundaries, and the rights of others must be respected. Sixth, the prohibition of eating flesh taken from a living animal. This law is often interpreted more broadly as respect for living beings and a rejection of cruelty. Seventh, the obligation to establish courts and systems of justice. A society is not considered truly ordered unless law exists and wrongs can be judged fairly. Taken together, these 7 laws form a remarkably compact moral system. They are simple, but they cover the foundations of social life: religion, speech, violence, sexuality, property, treatment of living creatures, and justice. That is why the Noahide laws remain fascinating even outside purely theological discussion. In a sense, they function as an ancient blueprint for civilization. If you strip away specifically ritual or ethnic dimensions and look only at the ethical structure, the list feels surprisingly recognizable even today. A modern secular society would also consider murder, theft, cruelty, and lawlessness destructive. Even without religious language, many of these principles still appear as basic conditions for social order. This is where the philosophical interest begins, because the 7 laws of Noah show that ancient religious systems were not only about worship, sacrifice, and ritual. They were also early attempts to answer a much more practical question: what rules are necessary for human beings to live together without collapsing into chaos? And here one notices something else. Many ancient traditions, even when geographically distant, arrived at surprisingly similar moral conclusions. Respect for life, limits on violence, regulation of desire, protection of property, and commitment to justice appear again and again in very different civilizations. That is why comparisons often arise between Noahide ethics and principles from other traditions. For example, in Indian thought and the early stages of yoga, one finds ideas such as Ahimsa, or nonviolence, along with restraint, truthfulness, and moral discipline. The vocabulary differs, the metaphysical background differs, but the ethical direction often feels related. This suggests something important. Ancient civilizations may not have developed in complete isolation from one another. And even where they did, human societies seem to have recognized similar truths. They understood that if violence, theft, unchecked desire, cruelty, and arbitrary power dominate, society begins to dissolve. So the 7 laws of Noah can be read in 2 ways. First, as a specifically Jewish theological concept about the moral obligations of non-Jews under divine law. Second, more broadly, as an ancient and highly condensed philosophy of public order, a minimal set of principles intended to make civilization possible. That is probably why they still attract attention. They stand at an interesting crossroads between religion, law, ethics, and political philosophy. They are old enough to feel archaic, yet clear enough to remain relevant.